So let's talk about Microsoft Forms today and what to consider when you are building your Power Platform solutions, and Microsoft Forms is a key component of the whole solution. My name is Andres Viarge and I'm member of BTB Consulting, where we do implementation, training and governance projects around Microsoft Power Platform. But now let's get started with video. Let's center the explanations of this video around a particular use case. So imagine you are part of a department that delivers internal training for your company. And what you need is an application to track those responses and send specialized links to the members of the training with pre-filled forms so that they can input data very easily. So let's trigger here a test YouTube English and copy what the attendees. This would be better an application rather than just text. But well, as you can see, let me refresh to get the proper ID. We have this new row. This would represent a new course. And what we're going to do is send the questionnaires using this button. And this is going to trigger a Power Automate flow that will generate the pre-filled responses. Whoops. Okay, now I just fixed the identifier of the flow. Okay, so now it should work. Great. Exactly. Now we are going to run a flow. And well, you can see now that, well, the status has changed. The button is no longer visible. And here, if we refresh, we'll see that the responses are here. We are saving, let's say, the responses. The responses answers are not yet generated, of course, because somebody needs to fill the forms, but we already have some pre-filled data, so the URLs of the form and the identifiers of the original course, among other information. So now what we would do is, well, this link would be sent via email, for example, via Teams to our attendees. And here you see that when I pasted the link, this field is already pre-filled with data because, well, that's what we did with the previous flow. And now what I would do is just select whatever data, submit information, and if we go back here, we should see in any moment, there was the answers to the survey. Very simple. Now let's start with multi-language localization and of course, conditional branching. So we got the option with Microsoft Forms to have the same form translated into different languages, which of course can be a complete mandatory requirement for your use case. And to do that, well, it's very easy to configure. Here in the three dots, you will have all this information. You go to here, multilingual, and basically you can configure here adding any language that you want. For whatever language, you will hit add, select the different languages from the list, and what you will see is that you can translate all the answers, all the questions, and the options, if you have option based questions, for example, into your particular language of choice. Now, when you have a form as a user, you will be able to select the language here. But what is more interesting is that when you send the email link, sorry, the link with the link in email or Teams, whatever, it's already in the selected language. So what you can do is here in any forms URL, add the following parameter: ampersand to add a new parameter. Where it didn't went. Let me just refresh. I don't know what I did. Okay, so we put here ampersand and hit lang, and then the code of the language, like this. So ampersand for the new parameter, lang of language equals, in this case, SS for Spanish. And if we do that, you see that it's already in Spanish. So it's as if the user would have selected the language here. That's pretty well resolved for Microsoft. But then when it comes to branching, I don't really like how this works. Well, same as if you use Google Forms or other technologies, you can here for any question change or add branching, which means that when the user responds to this question, where do you want to go? end of the form, other questions, or other sections. You can have different sections in a form to separate in different steps. So first step, I answer this question. Second step, I answer these other questions, etc. And it can, section especially, make a lot of sense, specifically when we have, for example, option-based questions where you can have different branches per each of the questions that you respond. So if each of the options. So here, option 1, option 2, we could have different selections here of where do I go when the user responds this particular option. And here it makes a lot of sense to redirect to a different section. For example, if you you don't have an account, go to create an account. Well, this won't be in a form, but you get the idea. Now, well, this is great for general purposes when we do have to apply some business logic. For example, if the user selects this option, present with some particular data, ask for certain information, apply some validation rules, do some automatic calculations, send an alert during the course of the form. You cannot do that, nor with any other forms technology. For that, you need another engine, another technology, which would be a dialogue. A dialogue would be a guided user experience where, yes, you are asking for some answers in a questionnaire fashion, but during the dialogue, during the course of the user answering the dialogue, you are implementing some business logic, presenting different information, performing calculations, creating data in a data source, whatever it is, during the course of the user filling the information, not after. Because now with forms, what we only can do is after the user submits a response, then act with that data using Power Automate, which is great, but doesn't cover real enterprise grade scenarios. Now let's switch gears towards the pre-filled fields in the form. So let's pick one of these pre-filled URLs to see the anatomy of it. So we have here one of these URLs, and you see that here we are already submitting the name of the course that the users have attended and have to respond. So when I copy this link, then this is already pre-filled for me. Now, how do we configure this? Basically, we go to the form here. There is in the options again, and it's pretty new, this option to get prefilled URL. If we do that, first you will need to, of course, enable prefilled answers. First time you do it, just toggle this, and then you will be presented with the form. So what you need to do is answer only the questions that you want to get the prefilled information for. In this case here, for example, let's put it here, test, and let's imagine that we also want the dissatisfied one, for example. Well, this option, this question, yeah. So if we do that and get the prefilled link over here, we will get a link that we can copy paste in a text editor, and let's see the anatomy of it. So we put here the parameters. Where is the ampersand? Let's search for ampersands here. Yeah, here. Boom. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, so you can see any URL for any web application. You got, this is the web application. This is the ID of the form as a parameter. And then we have, this would be the identifier of the first question, and what we just put here, test. And then for the second question, this is its identifier, and then the answer. So you can see here in the anatomy, this is what we put. It's a test, and it has the parameter is this one over here. So when we do that, let's see it from the SharePoint list again. We have here the name of the parameter that identifies that particular question, and then we dynamically, with a Power Automate float, fill this information with the title of the course, and then underscore the SharePoint ID of this particular record. This one over here, the ID. Why? Because then we want to save the responses in this particular SharePoint list item. Now, here we have serious issues with the way this works. It's a great functionality, but we have deficiencies. where first we cannot hide fields, and this is what I had to do. This I don't like this is this is not a good solution to put here underscore and the SharePoint ID. I did try to, and there were some posts over the internet where people, what they do is with branching, hide some fields, but then it wasn't appearing. I was putting the parameter in the URL properly, and then the answer wasn't appearing when you get it with Power Automate, or even in the Excel that the forms field. So that's not an option. And this is very nasty solution when you need to save some data that needs to be hidden for the user. For other stuff like the course name, okay, great, but the SharePoint ID or any other internal stuff that you want to maintain and keep hidden from the user, you cannot hide it. And well, if you could at least lock the field, because let's imagine that with this information, okay, the user is going to see it, but if they could at least not edit, so if this was locked, great. But for example, if I change here into a 13, this actually corresponds to this particular record in the SharePoint list. So I would be, if I knew what I was doing, I could be changing this, submit the information, and then this is going to submit it for a different, when it finishes, yeah, for this particular um, response instead of number 12, which was the actual link that I clicked. Now let's talk about ALM and Microsoft Forms. So when you have a Power Platform solution and you have dev, test, and prod environments, and you're working with Microsoft Forms, how does this work? Well, you can see here in my solution that I have to maintain several environment variables. Let me zoom out a little bit so that you can see their names. So, well, this is a SharePoint-based solution, so we need to maintain for the different lists and the site environment variables, of course. But now, take a look and have a look at the Microsoft Forms ID that we need to maintain, and then for any of the prefilled parameters, we should have an environment variable. And this looks exactly like this. So when we submit a response, we can select the ID or we can of the form, or we can use an environment variable. And for when, well, in any form, when you get the response from the flow, you only get an identifier of the response, but not the actual response. So you have to use this action get form details to get the actual data that the user has responded. And here you also need to use the form ID, and then the response ID can come directly from here. Now for saving the response, we are also using environment variables. And this is great. This works pretty good. And if you have a dev form and a prod form, which you should, because well, you don't want to be triggering your production responses when you are testing your form in development environment. What you have to do then is basically copy the form. So you can see here, when you have your form, you can hit the three dots and hit copy. When you do that, you're going to create a copy. Let me refresh. Something happened there. Let's copy right now. And this is going to have a different ID over here of the form, but then the IDs of each of the questions are going to remain the same. This is great for ALM purposes. Really, really great. The only big drawback is when you have to maintain version control. So let's say that you have deployed your solution to production, and now after some iterations, getting feedback from your users, you need to change the form. So what do? You change the form in the development, test there, move to test again, everything's good, and then you want to move to production. What do you do with the form? You have two options. Do you create a new question, copying the same question name and the options, etc., from development? If you do that, you're going to have different identifiers, because if every time I create here a new question, it's going to create a new identifier, and it's going to be unique for this form. Now, instead, if what I do is, great, let's copy again from development. So what I would need to do is delete. This would be the prod form, and this would be the dev form. What I would do is delete and then hit copy again and make the new copy the new production form. The disadvantages here are, well, pretty obvious. First, if we do that, we're going to lose any responses. Here, when you do collect responses and view responses, you're going to have here an Excel file that you can check with the responses, and that's going to be lost because if you delete the form, you also delete the Excel. Now, in this case, if we are saving the responses in a SharePoint list or any other data source, that doesn't really matter. However, because the identifier is going to change, if any user has saved the URL of the form, it will become obsolete and it will stop working. And also, well, you will need to change the ID of the form every time you change the form itself, which is not ideal. But anyway, those are the advantages, disadvantages of using Microsoft Forms when building Power Platform solutions, and you keep a basic ALM of separating dev, test, and prod environments. And with that, thanks a lot. See you in the next video where we will talk about other interesting things around the solution that we just saw.